Well, welcome everybody. It's been a couple of weeks since we had our last episode, taking a little break for family and life. Those that are able to join us, we're so happy you're here. This is Chinwag Nation, episode number 23. We're kicking off a new series called Garbage In, Garbage Out. And we are starting with probably the most common thing that you'll see with the concept of garbage in, garbage out, and that's data. And just to focus on data and why you should care. Like if you're a leader, we're going to talk about why you should care about data in general. Our opinions are our own. They don't represent past, current, or future organizations. And we just do this for community building. We believe in building lasting leadership communities, and we also believe that you shouldn't do the hard stuff together. And so, as a leader, especially in today's environment, leader of people, leader of things, it's probably the most complex environment people will ever experience, or have ever experienced. And so, we're excited to get into it with you. And Stephen, I mean, you're kind of the resident data expert. Like, why do you think this conversation is important? And before we really get into it, like, why is data, at least from a leadership perspective, why is it important?
I mean, there's so many reasons, right? Like I could sit on my soapbox for an hour and talk about this, but one is like it checks your assumptions. I find that like so often, especially when you're removed from like I would say that line worker level, right? Like assumptions about your business. How is it actually operating? What is the impact that you're making? And in some cases, right, like Brian, you and I both had a decent stint in the public sector, right? These programs are impacting lives.
Yeah.
And if you don't have data, you have very little insight into the return on investment that you're providing for those people or the quality in which you're serving those people. And so data can ultimately mean the difference between spending taxpayer dollars and operating versus spending taxpayer dollars and actually making an impact for individuals in their lives.
So poor data equals garbage service delivery.
It can. That's why I said assumptions, right? You can think,
Yeah.
yeah, I run the best business in the world, and maybe you do. But if you were ever going to sell that business, I guarantee you that people would be asking for your financials and for certain data.
Probably.
Right? That's
Probably.
right.
Probably. Well, I wrote down the first question. Um, well, I actually, before I get into that, like when I was thinking about this episode, like the first thing that came to mind for just this whole series is wherever your heart is as a leader, wherever you just sit fundamentally when you start your day, is where your priority is going to follow. And whether it's data, whether it's your strategy, whether it's your people, your team, wherever your heart is, that's where you're going to spend your time during the day and your focus. And fundamentally, wherever you focus, gonna that's gonna lead to, to Steven's point, something quality, right, coming out the other side of that. And you know, understanding that you can't focus on everything all the time. It's nearly impossible. And so I think we'll kind of touch on some of those things you can do and how you can overcome that as a leader, during our conversation today. But like just to relate to people out there, those that even just have to engage with data, look at data, process data, whatever it is. Um, why do people's eyes glaze over when
I mean,
the subject of data comes up? And
I,
like, and even just like geeking out on data, like we could have a phenomenal like geek out conversation around data, but most people they're like, I'm gonna leave that to the data scientists and the data analysts. Like,
for sure. I
why
mean,
should leaders care about it? Or why do their eyes glaze over?
there's definitely different leadership styles that make up an organization, right? And we've heard that whether it's your Myers Briggs or your DISC survey, but there's always that analytical leadership style
Mm,
that is it's its own asset for an organization, and it comes with its own challenges, right?
Yeah, it's
Um,
true.
I, you know, for me, being a total data wonk, like my eyes glaze over when people start talking about like theoretical philosophy or art, right? It's just not how I'm wired. And so I totally get that when people see data, they immediately start to associate things with mathematics or
Mhm.
science, right? And chances are, depending on how you performed in school and the trauma of your childhood as it relates to academics, like science and mathematics may not excite you very much. On top of that, to get like even a little deeper, I think data has been a challenge for enterprise ecosystems for decades, if not,
So,
I almost want to say like a century,
translate enterprise
right?
ecosystems for that.
So,
It's not. That's not
well,
Star Trek, folks.
no, no, it's just
So, what you mean
whether
large
you're talking about,
organizational systems, right?
yeah, whether you're
Yeah.
talking about the systems that hold the data itself, right? The way that it's organized, whether that's through the referential integrity of its databases, whether it's up in the cloud, whether it's structured or unstructured, that's one thing. But there's also governance. So, like, how are you, you know, ensuring that the right data is prioritized and that it's secure and that your systems are operating the way that you want them to operate, right? I'm trying to overly simplify this as well. Um, but for the longest time, I think people have struggled to become mature in their data environments. I've seen
Mm,
organizations time and time again, especially in consulting. I mean, folks want their data to uh, to come up to a certain level of maturity because it's
yeah.
just not there. And it's been a challenge that has plagued them for decades. And it is
Is
really
it
difficult. So I think
is
a lot
that
of times,
because it's a is that because it's an all hands on deck thing, or is it just because I remember in my master's course working on in my stats class, and they said most organizations don't do data well because it's too expensive, right? And it takes too much time.
yeah,
Is it, I mean,
I,
fun. Do you
I,
think that's why? Do you think it's a money thing, or do you think it's just because it's not the most important thing to pay attention to?
it's almost,
No matter the fact that it could be garbage in, garbage out.
I would say it's more of an economics problem. Like there's a way to optimize in what you're spending on your data and what you're getting out. In
Mm,
when you have a very immature data environment, you're collecting data from everywhere and it's unstructured and you're storing that data and even more expensive, your employees are having to wade through that data to try and tie it together and there's no quote unquote single source of truth
okay.
or
So let's
metadata.
hold on. Let's just sit there for a second. I think what you just shared is super relatable. Hope before I go into it, my lovely wife has joined us, our number one fan. My
Hi,
son was our
Joe.
number one fan, but I think he's not on because like if there's too many people on our internet while we're live, like the world will come crashing down. Uh, you're frozen now. Like the timing of that couldn't have been better.
I
Um,
feel like I'm not.
there you go. There you go. You're back. But you said something that I think people can relate to no matter where they're at in an organization. If you don't spend money, and this sits really super well with this idea that we're talking about with the series garbage in, garbage out. If you don't spend money on a good data system, governance, analysis, capture, documentation, whatever, the whole world, your people and you are going to have to wade through mountains of disconnected, you know, not and tick and time manually to hopefully get a report or a story that means something to whoever it is they're giving the data to. Like that in itself is probably the most painful aspect of not spending time and energy and money in data as a leader, even within your own team. I mean, that I
And I
think that
want
resonates with folks, Steven. I think that would
I want
resonate
to
with most people.
well, and I want to piggyback on what you're saying because when you say, "Oh, I've got this mountain of data and it's all disjointed and there's no single source of truth," a lot of people think, "Oh, I can just slap an AI model over it."
Oh,
And let me tell you,
there are people who are doing that and celebrating
putting
it.
putting bad data into a large language model or one that may already exist is only going to perpetuate the problem. Whether that model has to hallucinate, so making stuff up,
Because it's
making its
garbage
own
because it's garbage data, right?
garbage data,
Yeah.
or the data, some of that data that exists in there is good and it's gold, but that model is going to have to make guesses around what it is connecting and what that actually means for your business. And I would say like a key point of that is even today with say like Chat GPT that's got what a trillion is it a trillion parameters now? Something like that, something insane, right? You still
What
want to
is
check.
Steven? What Steven for folks like? What does that mean? What is a trillion parameters? Is
There's
that
a
like
lot of stuff in there. There's a lot of stuff.
okay? So like a trillion basically means like instructions, right? A trillion instructions. Is that kind of what you're trying to say? Yeah.
Yeah, and
So
that
basically, enough people have engaged with it at this point. It's got a lot of inputs to refine its model.
yes,
Okay.
yeah, and but when you think of the internet of all things, right, being a data source, like even if you're going and creating an agent, you have to be careful. Like there's a lot of garbage data out there on the internet. And
Oh,
those feed
sure.
into even some of our most trusted models, which have gotten refined over time. But it's always important to double check your data, double check the outputs,
Mm-hmm.
you know, make sure that this makes sense, check your footnotes, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you're sitting on a mountain of data in a really immature data environment, there's still a lot of stuff and a lot of work that needs to happen, even if you think that slapping an AI solution over it is going to fix all of your problems.
Yeah, I'm trying to put myself in like the shoes of folks and why this whole idea would be scary, right? I think there's a couple things to come to mind, like what is the good data going to actually produce? What story is it going to tell, right? Because I mean, I've seen countless times, and this is not. I don't think it's an ethics or integrity issue, right? It's just we want to tell a good story, right? Or we
Yeah.
want to tell the right story, even though the data the data might not tell the best story. We're trying to make it tell a good story. And what if the data doesn't tell a good story if we really clean it up? And then the other is uh, just the amount of work it would take to actually to do it. And like um, uh, I in my mind, from my perspective, the way to overcome both of those is just one step at a time, right?
Maybe got to prioritize.
Yeah, and one data set at a time, clean that up, go on to the next one, and really just uh bite-sized chunks. The same I think goes with like storytelling. Maybe your data doesn't produce a great story. Like you invest time, you clean it up and it doesn't tell a great story, but then it allows you to really solve the right problems, right? Because I think good data um at the end of the day informs decision quality, and uh it's worth it, right? I think in the long run to focus on the right problems because then you're really getting the to you. I think you mentioned this earlier. You're getting the bang for your buck on the resources that you have available to do the work. They're really all leaning in on the right things. But I think those are two things that might pop up, for somebody, for a leader of people, a leader of an organization. Like, what if the data tells a bad story? And then the second is like, I've got a huge data, environment, and I don't want to look at it. I'd rather just kind of like keep limping along and be good with that. So, I mean, how would you overcome both? Like, what would be your recommendations to folks who might be thinking about that as if they've always wanted to do this focus on data and cleaning it up, especially, now there's a lot of pressures to even like start talking about it and looking at it and engaging with it? Like, how would you overcome either of those?
Yeah, so the first scenario of like you're afraid of what the data is going to tell you.
Yeah.
Having been a data guy, right? I have worked in organizations where the data has told folks what they don't want to hear, and I've had leaders take two very different types of approaches. One say, how can we cover this up? Let's not get this out, right? Because I think a lot of people don't understand the magnitude of risk, right? Risk isn't just financial, there's political risk, reputational risk, things along
Yeah.
those lines
Sure.
that come with having to admit, like, I've got a bad business operation. Maybe it's hurting people, or maybe it's underserving somebody, or maybe it's not producing the margins that were anticipated, right? If you've got particular stockholders that are, um, anticipating how your business is going to perform. The others, and I think this needs to be a place where people start to get more comfortable, is saying, okay, well, now we know, what are we going to do about it? Right.
I
And
think that's a powerful story to tell.
well, because the thing
They,
is, it's like if you're afraid of what the data is going to say, that's living in ignorance, and ignorance is bliss, right?
mm,
Because the data is telling you something that is actually happening, especially if it's good data and good analysis, right? And ignoring that fact means that you don't want to necessarily face these operational things that need to be done, right? And maybe it is like we were talking about public service. Maybe you're underserving a large chunk of the population, but you're serving a particular set of the population really, really well. So
mhm.
do you decide, are we going to enhance the experience for those that we're doing really, really well with and continue to serve them? Or are we going to try and figure out, how do we serve this
Mhm.
magnitude of other people that aren't necessarily getting the benefits from that service that we need, right? Um,
Those are big
but
decisions.
it's
That's not,
absolutely a big decision, but
yeah.
they're decisions that, especially if you're in a competitive environment, that need to be made, right? If you're not thinking about these things, your competition will
Mhm.
be.
Mhm.
Um, and that, I think, segues really well into the other thing. Like, I've got a lot of data. I don't even know how to tackle this, right? Again, if you have a lot of data, I mean, for some people, that's a gold mine, right? Data can be an asset, but
Yeah.
it can also be extremely overwhelming. And to the point you were making before, Brian, like, you just have to start one piece at a time. And I
Mhm.
guarantee you that a vast majority of the data that you're hanging on to, that's super, super large, that if you're overwhelmed by your data set, you don't even want to start combing through it, is probably not even useful data that you are paying for to store and compute or egress or ingress, right, to the cloud.
Okay.
Um,
You gotta break it
yeah.
down then. Go
So
into
moving
and
it,
go out of the cloud.
yeah, to the cloud, right?
Yeah.
Which costs money, right?
Yep.
Um, and so, just like anything, you look at, like, what is the core data that I need for my business, and maybe start there, right? Maybe you've got some required reports that you have to put together. Maybe it's your financials. Maybe it's program data. Maybe it's things that you need if you're in the public sector that are required for federal audits and federal reporting, right? Start there and then just slowly work your way down. And it's, I would say, like, just to validate, it is overwhelming. And that's why you see so many organizations hire consulting companies to help with their IT projects and their data projects, because it's easier and less risky a lot of the times to bring in people who have done this multiple times for lots of other organizations,
Yeah.
um, and just pay a little bit more on the forefront of that for consultants to come in and do it than try to figure it out yourself.
All right. I got a less. I guess I was gonna say less nerdy question, but this is still kind of nerdy. Um, So if we aren't putting our time and energy in really getting our information structured in a way that gives us kind of a true reality of the situation, are we really just living in the matrix? Like,
That's
just
funny. It's funny
we're living
because
we're living in our own structured realities because we're choosing not to. Is it the red pill or the blue pill that gives you like the
it's
reality?
well, it's
I
funny
can't
because
remember.
there's companies like Nvidia, right? And Nvidia creates, I'm trying to think of the simple way to put this, chips that go into data centers that allow things to run really, really fast, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
They for I would say like half a decade have wanted to create an omniverse, right? And what that means is like an alternate reality of this reality that you could say like run simulations in
Mm.
and you know test things, whether it's a product or maybe it's like a flight simulation or maybe it's some,
I was just looking for a yes or no. Like,
saying
are we
like
living
it's
are we living in the matrix right now, Steven? Is this even real?
I mean, you might want to ask Jensen Wong from Nvidia, figure out which side of the matrix
Are
you're
we
on.
are we in a simulation right now? Like, that's
I
the question I have for you.
mean, that's a big philosophical question. I think there are some people that
Are
like
you
firmly believe that we are like in a simulation, right?
well, I don't know. I just
I mean,
I
but
think
what's the data to support it?
what's that?
What's the data to support it?
You know, I think I guess what I'm trying to say is if we don't take the time to really invest in, because this is what we're talking about, right, with this series, is like what you put into things is what you're going to get out of it. Garbage in, garbage out. If you don't invest the time on really kind of putting together, at least starting somewhere to put together information that you can make good decisions on, you run the risk of kind of having false confidence, right? You almost have like a false reality that you're living in. And that's what I meant by the matrix, right? Like, if all your information you're getting and you're consuming as a leader isn't good, or at least you haven't even checked to see if it's good, you're essentially creating a false reality for yourselves. I think that applies to this life in general. If you're looking at information and just consuming information and you're not actually checking where that information's coming from, you're essentially creating a false reality. And I think that's like when you think about an organization, that's a dangerous place to live in, right? You're making decisions on for your team, for your organization, maybe even like big money decisions that could be based off of a false reality.
Yeah.
And I think that's the point I'm trying to make, which is like you could get 5 years down the line and be like, oh my gosh, for the last 5 years you've been making decisions that are not based in in good information, and you've moved your organization, your team forward in a way that it'll take you a half a decade to get back from it. I
Yeah.
mean, I think that's the weight of what we're talking about here, you know.
Absolutely. And I think like to personalize it to leadership, right? Like people will come to you and raise red flags, like the sky is falling. And it's important to remain calm and ask questions and then check sources, right?
Of course,
Because if
yes.
you're gonna reprioritize and if you're gonna jump
Yeah.
on something, right? Um, it's important that you're leveraging those or I would say like examining all those different levers and examining the risk. Something else I want to call out too is, and I know this can get a little political, but the concept of social media and the algorithm, right? Is
The ma-
it's
the
all
matrix rhythm.
it's all data driven ways that people look at you as a consumer. What type of content do they want to see? How can I create confirmation bias? So like these are things that I believe. Here's a bunch of people that believe the same thing, right? And that also goes to advertising,
Oh
marketing.
yeah.
Um, And so just be aware of that. Like if you're getting a lot of your information from places that tailor that information specifically to your own biases, your own beliefs, then you're not thinking about the whole picture. And I think it's also created I just see it more often than not, like just reactivity of people.
Mm,
I think you had some stats a long time ago on social media and the information that's given to us and how negative it is most of the time, right? Your
yeah.
brain really does create these synapses and rewires to consume information in the way that you're receiving it, right?
Yeah.
And that way, if you're not on one of these social media platforms, you go into your everyday life and you think about like, okay, who has similar beliefs that I do? Who do I trust with my information? How do I consume information or ask questions about that information? Right? It can drastically impact your ability to be a data driven leader.
All right. So we're getting close. We've got about 15 minutes or so left before we wrap up. One final thing to dig into, and that is people who are just like, you know what, I don't need to look at data. Heck, I don't even need to spend time in it. I just go with my gut. My gut has never led me astray. I've been successful for 20 years going with my gut. Like, and I mean, I think there's something to that, right? There's like gather good information, look at the reports, and then there's just like there are some gut decisions sometimes. Like even though the data is telling you go one direction, everything in you saying go another. And so
Experience in and of itself, though, is
yeah,
a data set, you know,
yeah,
and,
that's true.
and
And
that sort of owns your gut because maybe you've been in that same decision before and you've gone one way and you've seen how it turned out, right? You
yeah, I
know,
mean there's a certain like I think, aspect to wisdom, which is I think what you're calling out. I do think too that like our brains are super powerful. And when what we would describe as a gut decision is really our brain, to your point, cataloging data sets over many years. And it might seem like a gut decision, but it's actually your brain's processing power. Um, you know, or AKA wisdom. So I think there's a certain point to that. But I I bet there are folks out there that are like, I don't need a report. I don't need to invest hundreds of thousands of dollars in a consultant or, a new cloud application. My guts never let me wrong. And now I've got
just
GPT, man. I've got
look,
AI.
some people do get lucky. Uh, you know, it happens. Our dear friend Ethan loves to rub that in my face that he just loves to be like press his luck and it tends to work out for him so many different ways. It drives me bonkers. Uh,
But it does work out for him.
yep, till it doesn't.
Yeah, I always think about I always think about why people don't do it because it's not common. Like what we're describing today, what we're talking about tonight, like it's not common. Um, and there will be more and more of a reliance on right AI to help out with this, which to your point earlier still needs to be checked, right? So maybe it'll be easier than it has been in the past. Um, I guess at the end of the day, uh, don't be surprised, right? If you aren't spending time, getting good information into whatever it is you're producing, don't be surprised if, you make a poor decision, or don't be surprised if your organization heads in the wrong direction. I feel like that's kind of negative, but I think that's
Cool.
the point. That's the point, right? I think if you're more likely to make a good decision and you're more likely to move your organization or your team in the right direction if you spend time, in the
Well,
space.
we've talked about hierarchy and what that translates to, right? And
Like
as
hierarchy
leaders,
in an organization or
yeah,
hierarchy of
yeah,
information? Yeah, okay.
hierarchy in an organization. Like
Yeah.
the higher up you are, the more risk you assume by the decision rights that you have.
Yeah.
Uh, and a lot of times you are going to have to make decision where all the information isn't necessarily available, but you go off of the information that's there. And then we've talked about continuous improvement, right?
Yep.
Execute and adjust, and replan, and do, execute, just right.
Yeah.
It's a scientific method, right? But
Yeah.
based off of what I know, this is the best decision I can make right now. Tomorrow it might be different. And I
Mm.
mean, we saw that with the economy when COVID hit, right? It was a giant stochastic problem, which meant we've never seen anything like this before. That no recession, no economic recession was ever the same.
Mhm.
And people were wondering, what am I supposed to do with my business? And
Mhm.
there's no economic information out there that I can rely upon. There's only like 2 days, 1 week, 1 month worth of data, right?
Yeah.
And you can only hone in your decision making power over time. But I think on a more positive note, right? Even if you make a bad decision, sometimes I think it's better to make a bad decision backed up by data so you can at least explain the thought process why the decision is being made at the time versus just saying I was shooting from the hip, right? And
Yeah.
it can mitigate your risk as a leader in the decisions that you're making.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up COVID, um, because I think, you can flip what you just described on the business side of things too. I was running a, uh, customer-facing organization during COVID for the state, and, it really was day to day, moment to moment,
Yeah,
right?
for everybody,
Like,
public, private.
we've never had to make decisions like this before. What do we do? You
Yeah,
know, I think I'm pretty sure that's where the term living document was born out of, was from COVID. Yeah,
could have been.
this is a living document.
Yeah,
We're gonna update it as we get new information. Um, uh, but yeah, I think there was a lot of that, right? And it personally made me more comfortable with making decisions without a lot of information, because I think that's a reality sometimes too. But you're just
yeah.
describing, right? Like, you're gonna have to make decisions without all the info, and that's a that's a skill also to build. Not just getting good data sets, put together. So that's a good call out. I like that. And COVID's a perfect example of that. And I think AI and this environment that we're living is another example of that. We don't necessarily know the impacts, right, of this
Sure.
transformation. And every day we're adjusting and we're making pivots and we're all learning together, as this evolution happens.
I do think with cloud computing now and the cloud management mediums that are out there and the AI technology that's out there, right? Like it's come a long way to digest imperfect data
Mm,
and make something actionable and pretty accurate and good out
mm,
of what was a pretty immature data environment. It's only going to get
yeah,
better.
yeah.
Um, and so I think people have that to look forward to. It just can seem really daunting, right? Like even the concept of the cloud. Where is it? It's out here somewhere. Where's my data? Um,
Mm,
but there's a lot of really important business metrics and business data out there that exist for a reason. You know, calculations that exist for a reason, and they can be incredibly insightful to how effective your business or your product or your processes are, and how you're delivering.
mm. Yeah, I think, if you're as a leader, if you're perpetually living in an environment where you're constantly checking and adjusting, I can kind of see how what we're talking about tonight can feel like hard to do.
Yeah,
If if you're hanging on by the, what is it, the seat of your pants, if you're hanging on by a thread because of all the constant change, whether it's new technology or, organizational disruption or something else. What we're describing is kind of like it's like a long game, right? It's a strategic activity. It's not just a go clean up a single data set, and so I can see how this could easily get pushed to the side, with how much change is out there and how much a leader has to carry, especially a leader of people, you know.
It's big, it's expensive, it's daunting. A lot of these types of projects fail. A lot of times it seems more advantageous to go after different strategic priorities and focusing your areas there.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but
Mm.
a but a very mature and frankly, like I don't think a lot of people have really experienced a super mature data environment and what that can mean for their business, right?
Yeah,
And
I
I can just if you don't know, you don't know.
I think we're going to start seeing that more and more, where these AI models get folded into SaaS applications and right natural language models where you're like you load all your data sets right into a technology and you say, "Give me this report." Anything, right? And it just
Yeah,
goes and pulls
yeah,
it all together for you. But
for sure.
but that's why I think we're talking about what we're talking about tonight. If it pulls everything together from a bunch of garbage, it's not going to matter how fancy your technology is, right? It's still going to be a crap output, you know.
I remember sitting for my actuarial exams and
Explain for folks what an actuarial.
just think like risk mathematics, right?
Okay, risk
And
mathematics. Okay,
but you're talking about these like incredibly complex
yeah.
mathematical models that you have to learn, right? And when you sit for the exam, they have a very short list. I think there's like two types of calculators that you're allowed to go in there with, and they're very basic, right? And when you go and take your test, they'll reset them and they check and make sure that you didn't
There's no
have it.
loaded
Yeah,
models in there.
right. Not that you could on these ones anyway, but because so much of the value is knowing how or why particular models or particular statistics are used in very particular situations. So that way the outputs are more meaningful.
Yeah.
And so it can also be a bit risky if you're just pulling together a report and you're not able to ask questions about it, right?
Because there's nothing
And,
behind it.
right. Or to tailor the approach, right? When
Mm,
I'm working with different AI agents and models, I frequently have to ask questions and validate the process and make sure that this is truly the path that I wanted it to go. Because I
mhm.
know what needs to be done. It's saving me a ton of time,
Yeah.
but I want to verify that it's not getting too creative, right? Or
Yeah.
making certain assumptions.
Yeah. No, it's good. It's good. Well, I know we're coming up to the end here, Steven. Any closing thoughts for folks as we wrap up? I mean, you're our resident data wonk, data nerd, data.
I wouldn't be surprised if this is one of the more poorly performing podcasts that we have, when it comes about, to data. Uh,
What? Yeah. What?
it was a
The data.
satisfying
The
full time.
data says we need to mix it up, man.
Well, the data says that our only audience is Joe. So
Joanne. Well, we get we definitely get
we do
some
we do
different analytics. I think people go and watch it after the fact, but uh, yeah,
this
our biggest fan is my lovely wife and my son. I was thinking about that. I'm like, why isn't Steven's wife like? Why doesn't she watch? What's up with that, man? I mean, I feel like I'm like,
it's juggling all those little kids out there, and I think the last thing she wants
yeah,
to hear is me talk about businessy stuff for any longer than she needs
yeah.
to.
Uh, oh, she's back. She said hilarious. Ha 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 ha. Ha ha. I think she was laughing at our earlier conversation about the Matrix. Maybe I don't know.
That
Well,
or our only fan.
That's maybe we should look at the data on our podcast, Steven. That's a good call out.
But I'm afraid of what it's going to tell us, Brian.
I don't know. I think we have enough data to tell us what it's going to tell us,
Yeah,
to
for
know what
sure.
it's going to tell us. No, I think for me, um, anything that we talk about, right? Whether anything that we've talked about to date, it's all about just taking one step at a time, and especially with data, clean up one report, clean up the next report, clean up the next, um, and just take it a little bit at a time, and before you know it, uh, you're gonna have a much more healthy system of gathering and processing information, and you'll have confidence in the decisions you make. I think there's a ton of value in that, and important to remember. So,
Something that I feel like is important for us to highlight with this one is that there can also be one like data about people, right? And
mhm,
that can help drive culture. But also, we've said this before, and I think we need to say it again that if you're ever soliciting opinions or information or data from people specifically, it's important that you respond to that in
mhm,
some way, shape, or form, right? Especially if it's about their well-being,
mhm,
culture, how you're operating as their leader, right? Um, I'm asking you for feedback. Here's what I'm going to go and do with it, and whether
mhm.
you're going to use it or not, it's worth that follow-up conversation.
Just talking about this last week, like, hey, let's go survey. Uh, and the conversation was like, okay, well, what are we going to bring back to the folks that we're surveying? I think that's a super important point
Yeah,
to close out with. So, well, thanks for joining us. Episode 23, Chinwag Nation. We're kicking off our series on garbage in, garbage out, and we started off with data. We are not going to have a live, not this week, but the week after. Uh, we'll have a live next week, but the week after that we will not be on. So, wishing you all a wonderful week, and thanks again, Stephen, for digging into this with me and hanging out with third place. Have a good day,
absolutely.
everybody.